The quiet of space was shattered by a sudden alert. A small, unmarked ship had appeared on the radar of the Imperial fleet. It was moving quickly, heading straight toward the heart of Imperial space. The sensors blinked with confusion as they tried to identify the strange ship. It was human. For the Empire, this was a huge surprise. Humanity was still considered weak, with no advanced technology to threaten them. Yet here was a human ship, heading directly into the most guarded part of Imperial space. No one had seen anything like this before. The Empire had conquered countless worlds, defeated many civilizations, but this was different. The ship didn't show any signs of aggression. It wasn't firing weapons or sending any signals. It simply approached, its dark silhouette against the vastness of space. There was something strange about it, something that made the Imperial officers nervous. "Send a message," the Imperial commander ordered. The communication system blinked to life, and the message was sent. "This is the Empire. State your intentions immediately." The strange ship didn't respond. The silence was deafening. The crew of the Empire's flagship watched the ship closely, waiting for any sign of action. Why hadn't it responded? Why hadn't it tried to explain itself? The silence was more unnerving than any weapon could be. The Imperial fleet sensors showed no sign of life aboard the human ship. It was as if the ship was empty. Yet it wasn't. There had to be someone on board. The Empire had never faced a situation like this, where a single human ship dared to enter their space. The commander paced back and forth on the bridge. He wasn't a man who was easily rattled, but something about this situation unsettled him. He had fought in countless battles, faced enemies from across the galaxy, but this was different. No one had expected humans to become a threat. The Empire had crushed every human colony they had encountered. The idea that one human ship could suddenly appear in their space was almost laughable, and yet here it was. "Prepare a fleet to intercept it," the commander ordered, trying to regain his composure. "We'll surround it and see what it wants. If it's hostile, we'll deal with it quickly." But as the fleet moved into position, the human ship didn't show any signs of resistance. It just kept moving forward, slowly, steadily, as if it had no fear at all. The Imperial fleet, massive and powerful, was now surrounding it, but the human ship didn't make a move to escape. It didn't even change speed. It seemed calm, almost as if it was confident that nothing could touch it. The Empire's generals began to whisper among themselves. Something wasn't right. A single human ship, so far into Imperial space. It didn't make sense. If humans had somehow developed advanced technology, why hadn't they used it before? Why hadn't they challenged the Empire earlier? The human ship continued its course, and the tension on the Imperial bridge grew thicker. What was this ship doing here? Was it a trap? Was there a hidden army waiting in the shadows? "Send another message," the commander said, his voice now trembling slightly. "This time, tell them to turn back. We will not tolerate intruders." The message was sent, but again, there was no response. The human ship just kept coming closer. And still, there were no signs of life. No weapons, no movements at all. The ship remained in eerie silence. The bridge crew exchanged uneasy glances. The more they watched the human ship, the more uneasy they became. It wasn't behaving like any ship they had encountered. It didn't act like it was afraid. It didn't seem to care about the enormous fleet surrounding it. The Empire's pride, its sense of superiority, began to waver. Could this one small ship be the beginning of something much bigger? Were humans hiding their true strength? The thought was both terrifying and impossible. The human race was supposed to be weak, fragile, and easily crushed. But the human ship didn't act weak. It didn't act scared. In fact, it was almost as if it knew something the Empire didn't. The fear began to spread, not just among the generals, but among the officers too. They had all been raised to believe the Empire was invincible. Yet here was a single human ship, calmly moving toward them, as if nothing could touch it. For the first time in many years, the Empire's mighty fleet began to feel small. The silence on the bridge was broken by the voice of the captain, who spoke in a voice that almost sounded afraid. "What if it's not alone?" he asked. "What if this is just the first of many?" The commander shook his head. "Impossible. No one has ever seen a human warship like this. If there were more ships, they would have appeared by now." But even as he said the words, he didn't sound so sure. The human ship was still coming closer. It was nearing the heart of Imperial space, and nothing the Empire did seemed to make it stop. The calmness of the ship only added to the tension. What was it doing? What did it want? No one on the bridge could answer that question. But one thing was clear: the Empire was not prepared for what was coming. The silence on the bridge of the Imperial flagship was suffocating. As the strange human ship continued its approach, the commanders, generals, and officers stared at the screen in disbelief. The Empire was used to imposing their will on the galaxy, but this was something they had never expected. A single human warship daring to enter their territory without fear, without hesitation. It was both puzzling and unnerving. The Imperial commander stood rigidly, watching the small human ship as it drew closer to the fleet. His mind raced. Why wasn't it responding to their messages? Why hadn't it made any attempt to communicate or retreat? What was its purpose? His voice broke the tension. "Send another message," he ordered, his words carrying a note of urgency. "Tell them to halt their approach. We have every reason to believe they are a threat." The communication officer quickly sent the transmission, but still, there was no response. It felt as though the human ship was simply ignoring them, as if it knew something that the Empire did not. The lack of any response, no sign of fear or aggression, made the entire situation feel like a puzzle that couldn't be solved. The fleet was now fully in position. Ships of all sizes, from mighty war cruisers to small, fast interceptors, formed a tight ring around the human ship. The commander's mind raced through every possibility. A single human ship alone, daring to face an entire Imperial fleet. It didn't make sense. Humans were supposed to be weak. They lacked the technology to compete with the might of the Empire. Yet, this warship, this small, silent ship was unafraid. "Prepare to move in," the commander ordered. His voice was steady, but there was an edge to it. Something about this was deeply unsettling. The Imperial fleet moved into position, surrounding the human ship from all sides. There was nowhere to go now. The Empire had them cornered. The human ship didn't flinch. It didn't change its course or speed. It just continued forward, as though the Empire's ships were nothing more than distant stars. The commander could not help but feel a strange unease growing within him. Why wasn't it trying to escape? Why wasn't it firing weapons, or at least trying to communicate? It was as if the human ship had already made up its mind. The officers on the bridge began to whisper nervously. "What if it's not what it seems?" One of them asked. "What if this ship is just a distraction?" Another officer nodded. "And we've been led into a trap." But there was no time for speculation. The commander had to act. He glanced at the tactical display, confirming the positions of the ships surrounding the human warship. "Target their engines. Disable them," he commanded firmly. "We will bring them in for questioning." His orders were relayed quickly, and the fleet's weapons were aimed at the human ship. But as the Imperial forces prepared to strike, something happened. The sensors began to flicker, and the fleet's targeting systems started to glitch. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible. The commander's brow furrowed in confusion. "What's happening?" he demanded. We can't lock onto the human ship," the weapons officer reported, sounding confused. "It's like our systems aren't registering it properly." The commander's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just a human ship. There was something about it, something in the technology that was preventing the Empire from properly targeting it. Was it a trick? Some kind of technology that the Empire hadn't seen before? Before he could give further orders, the human ship did something unexpected. It sent out a single message, a message that was both simple and chilling. "We come in peace, but if threatened, We will not hesitate." The words were calm, even peaceful, yet they sent a wave of fear through the crew of the Imperial flagship. How could one small ship, one lone human warship, speak with such confidence? The commander's mind raced. What did this message mean? What was the human ship planning? A low murmur spread across the bridge. No one spoke aloud, but they all wondered the same thing. Had they miscalculated? Was the Empire about to face something far beyond their understanding? Another officer spoke up, her voice trembling. "We've seen the reports. Humans are not supposed to have ships like this. If this is a trap, we've underestimated them." The commander turned sharply. "We have no choice but to continue forward," he said, though his voice now held a trace of uncertainty. "Increase the pressure. We will not be intimidated by one human ship." But inside, he wasn't so sure. The human ship had not flinched, not even when surrounded by the full power of the Empire's fleet. It had spoken with such calmness, as though it was used to this kind of situation. Could one ship really be capable of taking on the entire might of the Empire? The crew watched, silent, as the human ship continued its steady approach, the distance closing between them and the Imperial fleet. The tension on the bridge was thick enough to cut through. Each officer felt the weight of uncertainty pressing on them. What were they dealing with here? What was the true purpose of this ship? And more importantly, what did the humans have planned? The silence that had once been oppressive now felt almost like a warning. The Empire had prided itself on its power, on its unshakable control over the galaxy. But here, in the face of a single, unarmed human ship, everything they knew was being called into question. No one could have prepared for this. The atmosphere aboard the Imperial flagship grew heavier with each passing moment. The human warship, still silent and unyielding, continued its slow approach toward the heart of Imperial space. The fleet had been poised, ready for action, but now something had changed. The sense of certainty, the pride the Empire had long held, was crumbling. Officers, generals, and even the commander himself began to feel the weight of doubt settling on their shoulders. As the human ship came closer, it became more apparent that it was not acting out of fear. The calmness in its movements suggested that its crew, if there were any aboard, were confident, perhaps even certain of their course. The Imperial fleet had surrounded it, yet the ship didn't alter its trajectory. The sensors showed no signs of weapons being powered or any shields being raised, yet the ship's simple existence felt like a challenge to the Empire's power. The commander paced in his command center, his mind spinning. He had fought in numerous campaigns, seen fleets decimated and worlds conquered, but he had never encountered a situation like this. There was something different about this human ship. Its very presence was unsettling, like a storm gathering on the horizon, and no one knew how it would break. The communication officer's voice cut through his thoughts. "Commander, we are receiving another message from the human ship," she said. Her tone was calm, but her eyes betrayed a hint of nervousness. "Put it on the main screen," the commander ordered, though his voice had a slight edge to it now. He wanted answers, something that would explain the human ship's behavior. The screen flickered to life, and the face of a human officer appeared. Unlike the stiff, formal faces of Imperial officers, this person looked relaxed, almost casual. There was no sign of fear, no anxiety in their eyes. In fact, it was almost as if they were speaking to an equal rather than addressing an enemy. "We are aware of your presence," the human officer began, their voice steady and clear. "And we understand your concern. But rest assured, we come with no intention of conflict. Our journey here was to prove something, not just to you, but to the galaxy itself." The commander's brow furrowed. The message was cryptic. What did they mean by proving something? To whom? And why was a single human warship attempting to reach the heart of Imperial space? "We ask that you stand down," the human officer continued. "If you do, we can show you the truth of our strength. We offer no harm, only proof that humanity has grown beyond what you thought possible." The silence that followed the transmission was deafening. The officers on the bridge exchanged confused glances. What were they supposed to make of this? Was the human ship trying to trick them? Or was this some kind of elaborate test? The commander's mind raced. This wasn't just about a single ship anymore. The message the human officer had sent spoke of something more significant, something the Empire wasn't prepared for. A single warship claiming to represent humanity, daring to make its way into Imperial space, was a symbol of something that couldn't be ignored. Are they telling the truth? The commander muttered under his breath, more to himself than to anyone else. But the question lingered in the air. Could humans really have developed the technology and the resolve to face the Empire head-on? The fleet's sensors flickered again, this time with a warning. A low hum echoed through the flagship, and an alert sounded. "Commander, there's a disturbance in the sensors," the chief technician said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "We're not sure why, but the human ship is causing interference in our systems. It's affecting our readings and communications." The commander's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just that the ship was approaching. It was actively disrupting the Empire's systems. This was beyond simple navigation. The human ship seemed to possess some kind of technology the Empire had never seen before. The commander turned sharply, his voice now firm. "Increase our surveillance. I want every available sensor focused on that ship. I want to know exactly what it's doing." "Understood, sir," the technician replied quickly, but his voice lacked the usual confidence. This was no ordinary ship. The human warship was not just a small fleet of harmless civilians. It was something far more formidable, something that no one on the bridge could quite understand. As the Imperial fleet prepared to adjust its position, the human ship continued its slow, steady approach. There was something almost defiant in the way it moved. Deliberate, focused, as though it knew exactly what it was doing. It wasn't simply a ship, it was a message. "Do we engage?" a general asked, his voice breaking the silence. The question had been hanging in the air for some time now. Should they take action, or wait and see what this human warship truly represented? The commander's mind was still whirling. It was tempting to take action, to show the Empire's might, and crush the human ship, but something was holding him back. This wasn't a normal situation. The human ship had approached without any sign of aggression. It had even spoken to them in a calm and collected manner, not as a defeated foe, but as an equal. That in itself was unsettling. "Not yet," the commander said after a long pause, his voice steady but laced with uncertainty. "We observe. We need to understand what we're dealing with first." As the human warship continued its course, the bridge of the Imperial flagship fell silent once again. The tension was palpable. What would this ship do next? And what would the Empire do in response? There were no clear answers, only the unsettling feeling that things were changing, and that the balance of power in the galaxy might never be the same again. The hours passed in tense silence as the Imperial fleet surrounded the lone human warship. The once bustling bridge of the Imperial flagship had grown eerily still, every officer and crew member fixated on the small distant ship that seemed to defy all logic. The commander remained in his command chair, his fingers tapping nervously against the armrest as he watched the human ship approach the heart of the Empire's territory. Nothing made sense. The Empire was the most powerful force in the galaxy, a force that had crushed countless civilizations, subdued entire star systems. And yet here they were, facing a single human warship that was not retreating, not running, and most importantly, wasn't showing any fear. It wasn't acting like a ship that was overwhelmed or outmatched. Instead, it was acting with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going, and what it wanted to prove. The communication officer's voice broke through the tension once again. "Commander, the human ship is sending another message." The commander's stomach tightened. What more could they have to say? What was this warship hoping to achieve? He couldn't allow himself to be caught off guard by another cryptic message. "Put it on screen," he ordered, his voice clipped and impatient. The human officer appeared again, calm and composed as before. "We have reached your core systems," they said, their tone unwavering. "This is where the heart of your empire lies. But it is not invulnerable. You are not invincible." The words hit like a sudden gust of cold wind. The commander's face hardened, but he did not speak. The message continued. "We have come to show you that humanity is no longer the weak, insignificant species you once believed us to be. We are stronger than you think. We have learned. We have grown. And we are not afraid." The image flickered slightly before going black, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. The human's words hung in the air like a challenge. It was an odd thing to hear. To the Empire, humanity had always been a lesser species, one that could easily be crushed, absorbed into the Empire's vast reaches. But these humans were different. Their words were not desperate. They weren't begging for mercy. They spoke as if they were the ones in control, the ones with the power. The commander clenched his fists. The audacity of it. A single human warship, in the heart of their space, speaking of strength and power. It was unthinkable. The Empire was accustomed to imposing its will on others, to bending entire species to its rule. But now, this lone ship was doing the opposite. It was speaking of its own power, daring to suggest that the Empire itself could be challenged. He turned sharply toward the chief strategist, his mind racing. "Analyze their capabilities. What do we know about their ship? How can they afford to act like this? There must be something we're missing." The strategist, a seasoned officer with years of experience, quickly brought up a detailed analysis on the screen. "The ship is unlike anything we've encountered. Its design. It's not conventional. The technology we've been able to scan is advanced. More advanced than anything we've seen from any species we've encountered in recent decades. But we can't get a clear picture of its full capabilities." The commander frowned, frustration building. Then why hasn't it attacked? What's stopping it? Their systems. They're blocking our attempts to scan them fully. Whatever technology they're using, it's interfering with our scans. It's almost as if they're choosing what we can and cannot see, the strategist replied, voice tinged with awe. That was it. The human ship wasn't just powerful, it was smart. It wasn't trying to overwhelm the Empire with brute force, as most civilizations would have. Instead, it was controlling the flow of information, making the Empire second-guess its own strategies. The commander's eyes narrowed. They were playing a game, and so far, they were winning. "We need to know more," he said firmly. "Prepare the fleet for another maneuver. We need to find out what that ship is capable of before we make any more moves. I want to know its weaknesses. I want to understand it completely." The Imperial fleet shifted slightly, trying to adjust its position without fully surrounding the human warship. The commander hoped that by giving the ship more space, they might be able to observe its actions and learn something new, something that would give them the upper hand. As they maneuvered into position, the sensors began to react again. The strange interference that had plagued the fleet earlier seemed to intensify. This time, the disturbance was more pronounced. The ships in the fleet seemed to lose their connection to the central command for a moment, as if they had been disconnected from their source of coordination. "Commander, our systems are acting up again," the technician reported, his voice laced with unease. "We're losing communications with several ships. It's like something is draining our power." The commander's eyes widened. This was no longer just a situation about one human ship. It was about their entire fleet. The human warship wasn't just a target. It was a disruption, a force that was influencing the very fabric of their military coordination. This was no longer just a matter of stopping a single ship. This was a new kind of warfare. "What is happening to our fleet?" the commander demanded. "We should be in full control. This should not be happening." "We can't explain it, sir," the technician said, panic creeping into his voice. "The interference is too strong. We're losing control of several of our ships." The commander stood, his hands gripping the edge of his chair. This was a turning point. The human warship was not just some isolated threat. It was the beginning of something much larger, something the Empire had not anticipated. The idea that a single ship with a crew of humans could disrupt the might of the Empire's entire fleet was unimaginable. It wasn't just a ship that had entered their space. It was a symbol, a message that the balance of power in the galaxy was about to shift. The silence on the bridge deepened. Every officer on the ship understood one thing. They were no longer the ones in control. The human warship had already proven its strength, its ability to undermine the Empire's greatest assets. And as it drew closer, the Empire could feel its grip on the galaxy beginning to slip. The tension on the Imperial flagship was now unbearable. The human warship, still silent and undisturbed, hovered just outside the heart of Imperial space. Its unmoving presence had become a symbol of something more than just a simple ship. It had become a question, one that the Empire had no answer to. Every officer aboard the flagship felt it, a sense of uncertainty that had never been part of their military culture. The Empire had always been the one to impose its will, the one to dictate terms. Now, they were on the defensive, unsure of what the next move should be. The commander's eyes scanned the bridge. His officers were at their stations, each one quietly working, their expressions a mix of focus and unease. The fleet had already tried to maneuver, to position themselves in a way that would give them an advantage. But the human ship remained unmoved, unaffected. It wasn't simply sitting idle. It was calculating. It was waiting. But for what? "We need to take a step back," the commander said, breaking the silence. "We've been acting on assumption, on old ways of thinking. Let's look at this situation from a different angle. This isn't just about power. It's about perception. This ship doesn't need to fight us to prove its strength. It's proving it by being here." The strategist, who had been deep in thought, nodded slowly. "You're right. It's a display of confidence, a display of power, not through force, but through presence. They've come here, and they're showing us that they don't need the numbers, they don't need the fleets. They're showing us that a single human ship can challenge the might of the Empire." The commander frowned, his mind racing. But why? What is it they hope to gain? They can't possibly believe they can win by force alone. There has to be something else. "Maybe it's not about winning, sir," the strategist said. "Maybe it's about showing that humanity has reached a point where they can no longer be underestimated. Perhaps they're sending a message to the galaxy, that even the smallest, seemingly weakest species can stand toe-to-toe with the Empire." The commander's frown deepened. This was a possibility he hadn't considered. The Empire had never worried about other species challenging their power before. They had grown complacent, confident in their strength. But this human ship was different. Its message wasn't one of conquest or destruction. It was one of equality, of standing tall beside the Empire, not cowering before it. "There's something more to this," the commander muttered to himself. "What if we've been underestimating them all along?" His voice was barely above a whisper, but it echoed in the stillness of the bridge. His officers exchanged uneasy glances. They had all been trained to think of humanity as a lesser species, a species that was easily dominated. But now, in the presence of this human warship, everything was changing. The questions that had been bubbling under the surface were now undeniable. Could humanity really be this strong? Could they really pose a serious threat to the Empire's supremacy? "We need to think this through," the commander continued, standing up straighter now. "This is more than a challenge to our military might. It's a challenge to our very belief system. If this warship is allowed to continue its journey, if we fail to stop it, then everything we've built, the Empire, our control over the galaxy, could unravel." "But what can we do?" the communication officer asked. "We've already tried every standard method of engagement. They haven't responded to any threats. They haven't shown any signs of aggression. If we escalate any further, we risk looking like the aggressors. We risk alienating the very thing they've come here to show." The commander turned sharply to face her, his mind working furiously. "You're right. We can't afford to make ourselves look like the villains here. That's exactly what they want us to do. They're not here to fight. They're here to make us doubt ourselves, to make us question everything we know. The commander's gaze shifted to the human warship on the screen. Its lights blinked steadily, its silence almost deafening in its calm. It was as though the ship knew that the longer it remained, the more the Empire would unravel under its pressure. The longer it stood there, the more the Empire would question its own power, its own ability to dominate the galaxy. And as they questioned themselves, the ship would grow stronger, its message clearer. "What if this isn't about winning a battle at all?" the commander said, as a realization dawned on him. "What if this is about teaching us a lesson, one that we don't want to learn? That no matter how strong we are, there will always be something or someone out there who can disrupt our plans, who can make us reconsider our assumptions. What if humanity is simply trying to show us that they will no longer stand in the shadows?" There was a heavy silence as his officers processed his words. No one spoke for a long moment, but the truth of the commander's statement settled in the air around them. This was not just a military conflict, it was an ideological one. The Empire had always seen itself as the pinnacle of power in the galaxy, the model that everyone else should follow. The human warship was here to challenge that model, to say that there was room for others at the top. "We've been too focused on the idea of defeating them," the commander said softly, his voice laced with understanding. "But what if this isn't about us defeating them at all? What if this is about us recognizing them? What if we're meant to see that they've risen to a point where we can no longer ignore them?" The communication officer spoke again, her voice less certain than before. "So, what do we do now?" The commander's expression hardened. "We do what the Empire always does. We adapt. We learn. We show them that while they may have the power to shake our confidence, we still have the strength to move forward. But we will not engage them with force, not yet. We need to see if we can understand them first. What do they want, really? We need to communicate, not fight." For the first time since this whole ordeal began, the commander felt a small glimmer of hope. There was still a way forward. They could still find common ground, still find a way to continue the Empire's legacy without turning this situation into a battle of destruction. But that hope was fragile, and the uncertainty remained. The human ship hadn't made its move yet, but the question now was clear. Would the Empire be able to understand the message humanity was sending, or would they ignore it at their own peril? The days dragged on, the presence of the human warship still hanging over the Empire like a shadow. The fleet remained at a distance, wary, watching with eyes that could no longer ignore the quiet, deliberate strength of the ship. And yet, nothing had happened. The human warship made no move to engage. It simply drifted, its calm demeanor unshaken. It was as though the ship was waiting for something the Empire had yet to understand. The commander paced his quarters, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. His mind raced with possibilities, each one leading to more questions than answers. What was the true purpose behind this lone ship? It wasn't just a warship. It was a statement, a living symbol of something much larger than any weapon or fleet. It had become the center of a crisis that was both military and philosophical. He had already sent several attempts at communication, but there had been no response. The Empire's standard methods of dialogue, direct, stern, and commanding, had been met with silence. There were no demands, no threats. The human warship simply existed, and that existence was enough to throw the Empire into disarray. What are they waiting for? He muttered to himself as he gazed out of the window, staring at the stars. Do they expect us to come to them? Or are they simply testing us, forcing us to confront the reality that the Empire is not the unquestionable power it once was? His thoughts were interrupted by a soft beep from the console in his quarters. He turned, his eyes narrowing as he read the message on the screen. It was another encrypted transmission from the warship. This time, the message wasn't a demand, nor was it a warning. It was a simple request. "We wish to speak. We wish to understand." The commander felt his heart skip a beat. These were words that carried weight, words that, in their simplicity, carried a deep sense of purpose. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation. But to what? He immediately sent word to his officers, gathering them for an emergency meeting. They needed to discuss this latest development, to determine how best to approach this unprecedented situation. There were so many unknowns, so many variables. But one thing was clear: the Empire could no longer remain silent. The meeting was tense. Every officer had their own opinion on how to handle the situation, but there was one common thread running through their thoughts: caution. The Empire had always been the dominant force in the galaxy, and the sudden appearance of a single human ship was a challenge to everything they had built. But it wasn't just a military challenge. It was an ideological one. The Empire had long believed that its power was absolute, that no species could rise up to challenge its supremacy. But the human warship was different. It wasn't showing force or aggression. It was showing restraint, intelligence, and an unwillingness to back down. And that in itself was terrifying. It forced the Empire to reconsider everything it had taken for granted. "We can't afford to ignore them," the commander said, his voice firm as he addressed his officers. "This isn't just about a warship. This is about something much bigger. Humanity is sending us a message, whether we want to hear it or not." The lead strategist spoke up, her expression thoughtful. "It's not just about power. They're not trying to prove they can defeat us. They are trying to prove that they are capable of standing alongside us. They're saying they're no longer beneath us. They want equality, not subjugation." The commander nodded slowly. "Exactly. They're not here to conquer us. They're here to challenge the very idea of domination. They want us to see them as equals, to acknowledge their place in this galaxy. And the longer we hesitate, the more power they gain." The communication officer chimed in. "So, what should we do? We can't just let them continue floating around in our space without any action." "We don't act out of fear," the commander replied, his tone calm but firm. "If we act out of fear, we will play directly into their hands. We need to approach this with diplomacy, not aggression. We need to show that the Empire is willing to listen, to engage, to learn." There was a moment of silence in the room as the officers considered this. For the first time in a long while, the Empire was faced with the possibility that they might need to change their approach, that they might need to open themselves up to something new, something unexpected. The commander turned back to the screen, where the human warship remained. It was still there, a silent monument to humanity's resolve. He knew that the next step was crucial. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. This was more than a military decision. It was a moment of reckoning. The warship had shown them its power, not through force, but through presence. It had shown them that humanity was no longer a species to be dismissed. They had earned their place at the table, and the Empire had to decide if it was ready to accept them as equals, or if it would continue to view them as beneath its notice. The decision was clear. The commander stood tall, a newfound resolve in his eyes. "We will make contact," he declared. "We will show the Empire's strength through understanding, not through force. It is time we learned what humanity truly wants." And with that, he gave the order. The communication channels were opened, and the first step toward a new chapter in the galaxy was taken. As the transmission was sent, the commander couldn't help but feel a sense of uncertainty mixed with a strange sense of hope. Perhaps this encounter with humanity wasn't just about a new military power. It was about a new way forward for the galaxy itself. For the first time in a long while, the Empire was no longer the unquestioned ruler of the stars. The arrival of the human warship had changed everything. And now, the Empire would have to decide whether it was ready to adapt, or whether it would fall into the past.